Hello, my name is Myriam Chancy. I'm the HBA Chair of the Humanities at Scripps College, and I'm a specialist in Caribbean women's literature and also a novelist. I'll be speaking today about the relationship between my novel, What Storm, What Thunder, which is on the 2010 Haiti earthquake, and Myrlande Constant's beautiful mural on Janvier 12, 2010. I want to begin with an invocation to Legba, and this also begins the novel. Atibo Legba, ouvrez porte là pour moi. Papa Legba, ouvrez porte là pour moi. Ouvrez porte là pour moi cab entrer, pour moi cab tourner. Atibo Legba, open the door for me. Papa Legba, open the door for me. Open the door so that I can enter, so that I can return. Legba is the Loa who provides us a way into communication. He opens the doors between the profane and the spiritual, between the material plane and those other worlds beyond us. And when I came into Myrlande Constant's retrospective here at the Fowler, I saw a video interview with her where she talked about her beginnings as an artist and how at the very beginning of her career, she hadn't yet perceived that she needed to always invoke Legba. And I immediately felt a connection to her work, especially to her work on the Haiti earthquake, because I began my own novel with this invocation, with an intuition that I needed to open the doors for the reader and bring them into a Haitian consciousness. And then when I looked at the mural itself, I wanted to look for that sign of Legba. You know, where would Legba be in this mural? But we can interpret the signs in different ways. One way to view this invocation of Legba is in the center here, where she has a cross, which is a cross of veneration, but can also be read as the peristyle of the Vodou Unfa, where people gather to venerate the gods. And in this red candle, because Legba is signified by the color red, and is also signified by libations, or the giving of rum, which you see here tied to the cross, and pouring into another offering a basket of fruits. And then as I looked more closely at this mural, and how I like to read the mural is in a spiralist way, which is a term that we use in literature, especially with the Haitian literature of people like Franck Etienne, because they think about time in a different way. So often people will look at a mural like this who are maybe not Haitian and think there's so much going on in the piece, but if you read it in a spiralist way, so meaning that you're moving through the piece, you know, looking at it not from left to right, but moving in different corners and pieces of the mural, you start to see that a story is being told, but it's breaking with the space-time continuum. And the break with space-time continuum means that you're not thinking about chronological time, but you're thinking about breaks in time, or relationships between different moments or different people within space, spatiality, and also time. So when I look at this basket, I start thinking immediately of the people who would provide the goods for it, and those would be the Madame Sarah, or the market women. And interestingly then, if we move from the middle to that basket to the right-hand corner here, there are two figures who have blue, who are wearing blue and kerchiefs on their head, who signify the market woman. And you can also see this because of the skirt that this woman completely at the right is wearing, which is chiefly how market women dress, with skirts and tops and a kerchief. And the blue is also reminiscent of Erzuli or Yemaya, Loa of the sea. And it's very interesting to me that she placed them in the foreground, because the Madame Sarah are the women who hold the economy of the culture together and also produce for everyone, or bring produce to everyone. And the marketplace is also where everyone coalesces or is brought together from different classes. But market women are not often talked to or talked to about the politics or the economics, global economics, that affect even very small businesses. And so I think she foregrounds them because they are so important to the culture. And in my work in the novel, what I did was bookend the novel with the voice of a market woman named Malou. And she will then tell you her experience of the earthquake. So I'll read from Malou and then continue with a reading of the mural. So Malou says this: I watched. That's what old market women do. We watch. But this time, the lot of us market women sprang to action, even as our bones creaked for lack of cartilage and oil. Like the others on the street, we used anything in hand we could find. Useless things like spoons and forks, the metal ends of umbrellas, as if our puny things or fingernails could move all that. Only the lucky were saved. Being lucky meant simply that you were closer to the surface, or that fewer things blocked the way to being found. We heard people on their cell phones all and up and down the street, begging frantically for help, giving directions to where they thought they were beneath the rubble within the rooms of their houses. Phones rang and we heard people answer them, then fewer and fewer voices. The tinny, persistent ringing of cell phone tones, different songs rising like wind from underground with no answer. We heard our own voices screaming at each other, asking for help, not knowing what to do, faces covered with dust and sweat and other things later to be determined what to do. There was nothing to do but to scream, try anything, flail our hands, scratch at the earth like my chickens when they get confused because their fresh laid eggs disappear one by one and still they lay more. Try anything and still it's too late. After the earth rose and split open, yes, I saw angels walking, but there had also been dust, white dust, everywhere, caking all objects and every moving thing. The dust came from the concrete crumbling to pieces as buildings flattened, but there were also other things mixed in, blood and bones. Had I mistaken the walking dead for angels, survivors stumbling through the debris, with the same white flakes covering their bodies from head to toe that covered mine? So when I first saw the mural at the Fowler, one of the things that struck me was this figure here. So we've moved from the market women at the right to this figure on the left, who you can see is beaded in white. And I immediately read that as Constant telling us what she saw then, like Malou, the people covered in white dust, the people covered with debris. And then my eye scans up and you see a house that is falling apart, someone being hit by that house, somebody reaching out to help them. So like Malou talking about how people are helping each other in this time of disaster. You see another man coming back to the center here who is taking away the dead in a wheelbarrow. So this also speaks to Constant's attempt within this space to capture what occurred to regular, everyday people in, across the socioeconomic strata of Port-au-Prince, who were beleaguered by this catastrophe, all at the same time, and tries to capture in as many images as possible, the effects of a catastrophe, those who were slain by it, injured, those who survived, and to give voice to the 250,000 people and plus, because at this point, the numbers are around 310,000 people who perished in that 45 seconds, January 10, 2012. And also to give voice to the 1.7 million who became food and housing insecure as a result of a catastrophe. And still today, there are, I believe, around 50,000 people who are still in internally displaced people's camps, IDP camps, in the capital, in addition to those who were left home insecure after the 2021 earthquake. And so one of the connections to my novel is that I try to tell the story of the earthquake through 3 family groups and 10 narrators. And sometimes people will ask, well, why did you have 10 narrators as opposed to 1 or 2, as is classically done in a novel? It was because I was, like Constant, trying to capture as many of those voices, women, men, children, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and try to find a way to capture what was a national catastrophe, but often, from here in the US or outside of Haiti, when we see cataclysms, we only know that national discourse, and then we move on to the next cataclysm, but we might not understand what that catastrophe might have been like on a familial level, and then on a personal level, and that people experience catastrophe and recovery very, very differently. This is part of why I think she populates this mural with so many different individuals. Now, if we move back to the center of the mural or tapestry, I know we've given her work different names coming out of the drapeau tradition, but I think it's important to think about her work as being complexly located beyond the drapeau tradition in what she's also creating, but also in a long tradition of tapestry cross-culturally. But one of the things that she does superbly in all of her work, and we see here again, is the invocation of Vodou. And it's very important that she centralizes these figures. Here you see the figure in a suit, a top hat, and with glasses on and off. This is Baron Samedi, and then you see Grande Brigitte above, both of whom, interestingly, like Legba, who are intercessors between the living and the dead, and they help the dead cross over into, from the material world into the spiritual world. They help those of us who pass away become ancestors and part of another life. And when the earthquake occurred, right after, soon thereafter, many evangelists, primarily in the United States, started talking about the fact that this befell Haiti because of what was called a quote-unquote pact with the devil, thinking of Vodou as a religion that was not, a positive one. And there was also a blaming of the M society, people who are identified as queer, but in particular of lesbians. And I really had to think this through for myself. Why would this happen? Of course, Vodou gets a bad reputation because people don't understand it, that it's a healing tradition, that it's the way that formerly enslaved people resisted, slavery. But then when I tried to think about queerness and M society, I was thinking, why would lesbians be blamed for this? And this also happened in the late 1800s when the last big earthquake hit Haiti in the northern part of the country, near Cap Haitien, the second largest city of the country. And I understood for myself, and this was happening in Haiti, not outside of Haiti, this blaming of women, that this had to do with thinking of women who stand, in a sense, alone, apart from the society, as being very powerful, somehow unsettling the entire society. So in the novel, I brought those two things together with the figure of Sonia, who is a prostitute who identifies as M, works in the big hotels, a hotel that fell, and which I image to be something like the Hotel Montana, which fell in Port-au-Prince, and her partner Dieudonné, who is a fixer and also identifies as M. And both of them have very strong ties to Vodou, and as you'll see, to Baron Samedi, who is also the head of what we call the Guédé, or the Loa of the dead. So this is Sonia. Sonia speaking first of Dieudonné. He had known that something was wrong, was going to go wrong. He told me later that he could sniff it in the air, a too clean smell that comes in the minutes before a hurricane or a thunderstorm, when the skies are clear and crackling with electric energy, before the winds pick up and snap fronds clean from swaying palms whose rhizomes grasp the earth like tentacular fists, as if fearing to be uprooted by the squalls. A too clean smell where there should have been only the usual stench and smoke from the burning of garbage heaps gathered at the edges of the street and set to flame there before children making their way to school. Not that such order could be counted on, but people tried. He was confirmed in his suspicion that things were off when he saw the short pear-shaped walnut-skinned man in the dark suit and hat with a white shirt straining across the reach of his bulging, pregnant-like belly sitting at the bar a few feet away from the kidney-shaped pool. It wasn't the man he told me was his cousin, Richard, who was in town only for a few days and who he had said wasn't anyone we needed to worry about. Richard thought only about himself, according to Dieudonné. He was an important man overseas and didn't have time to think about the trouble he could cause others, for like most men, he caused trouble along his way anyway. No, the man in question was not Richard, nor was it Leopold, another distant relation whom I knew only from the way he raked his eyes over my body every time he saw me, attempting with his gaze to penetrate through skin and bone, as if my soul would release itself to him and only him. No, not Leopold. The man eyeing me was much older but voracious in his attention. He stared at me as if I was the round, reddish-green apple he was avariciously biting through that morning. He held the apple akimbo in one hand preciously between bites, while the other hand rested ceremoniously on the head of a cane shaped to resemble a duck or a swan, with two eyes made of red stones, one on either side of the head. The animal head of a cane peered through the gaps between the man's plump fingers. The sight of it was chilling, as if it might turn into a snake at any moment and strike us dead. I saw Dieudonné shiver from across the bar when later the man lit up a thin cigar. He gave me a look across the counter, and I could see in his eyes that we were thinking the same thing. Guédé, c'est Guédé qu'il a, the god of death. We read each other's thoughts. Dieudonné kept watch on the man as if to protect me from imminent danger, but the man never moved from his seat, never sent over rum or wine or even water. Even later, as we were attempting to get out of the city on motorbike, the hotel fallen, the roads blocked, buildings that we had known all of our lives now in pieces, neither dead nor living, accounted for, we wondered if we should have done more to acknowledge that death itself had entered the doors of a hotel. Baron Samedi, the man with the cane, if we should have given a warning to others. How we had made it out was still unclear. We had been in the elevator with Leopold only minutes before, stepped out into the lobby, then had decided to escape the hotel to get some air anywhere. And then, the minute we reached Dieudonné's motorbike, parked under a tree some 50 feet away from the winding road that led up the mountain to the hotel, the ground beneath us swayed and undulated like a carpet being shaken in the air to clear it of crumbs after a meal. We were the crumbs lifting, weightless. We reached for each other's hands as we rose up in the air. We heard a great thunder, and then, suddenly, the hotel had risen, then fallen in on itself like a cake of many layers. We reached for the tree against which we had left the motorbike to steady ourselves, wrapped our arms around it, the motorbike on its side at our feet, but our feet still there, on the ground. Everything around us heaved, covering us in a heavy coat of dust. So again, we have that imagery of dust that we saw over here with this image, and that we see also at the very top of the mural with the angels weeping, but the angels are also covered in white, suggesting that dust, the covering of people with the debris from everything falling, as we see image here. And to me, it's also interesting because in this section with Sonia and Dieudonné, when they leave the hotel, they go towards a tree. And so you can be brought back, if you want to read these two in relationship, not only to the tree that she has here on the side, but back to the cross and that center peristyle. And so they see Baron Samedi, and Baron Samedi, as we see here, is kneeling. And so he is weeping like the angel above with the people, and he is also trying to help the people in this moment of catastrophe, along with Grande Brigitte, to bring them to the other side. And so what's interesting also in this iconography is that, I was born in 1970 when the Duvalier regime moved from the Papa Doc era to the Baby Doc era. And during this period, 57 to 86, Baron Samedi, Papa Doc had found a way to conflate himself with Baron Samedi, the god of death, because of the way in which he terrorized the nation. And so when we see Baron Samedi now in Constant's work, there is no longer this association with Papa Doc, with a god who is terrorizing the people. We instead now see a Baron Samedi who is ours, who is now part of us, and who is weeping with us. So in the same way that Constant has us move with her into the present and into the future, understanding the gods as being part of our culture and part of what sustained people in this terrible time, she also gives us an indication that there is hope somewhere beyond this catastrophe. And so I looked for those indications, and I find them in her invocation of Oshun. Oshun can be read as also an Erzuli figure in our culture, in Haitian culture. Some people might think of Erzuli Dantor, others of Erzuli Freda. But those two figures are, and Oshun in particular, are goddesses of the sea, but they're also protectors of women, single women, and of children. And so if you see here, there is a figure of a younger woman who is wearing a yellow dress. There is also a figure at the back here behind the red candle that for me signified Ligba, also dressed in yellow. And there is also a masked figure over here below the black cross, who is also wearing a sequined yellow. So I find this interesting because if we go back to the invocation of Legba and this idea of communication between the profane world and the material world, there's also an indication that Constant is telling us that there is this potential for rebirth, which is represented by these Oshun figures. And in my novel, this figure I think would be Tafia. Tafia is a 15-year-old girl who, like most teenagers, is in high school, is looking forward to the next dance, the next outing, who might be her boyfriend, and in the middle of trying to sort that out, who her best friends will be and so forth, she experiences January 12th, 2010. And so in that moment, her whole life falls apart. And she begins to have all of the experiences that we heard about on the news, which is she and her family end up in an internally displaced people's camp, and there she experiences sexual violence, from which she will then have a son. But the irony is that this is the figure then who will have so much to teach others. And I think, like the figure, especially this younger female figure here who is wearing the yellow dress, is suggesting that there is a future for future generations. And so I'll read from Tafia. Some months from now, a year that started with the splitting open of the earth, and so many deaths will end with my son, born in a tent by the side of a road, in a camp below the broken cathedral where the market used to be. He will be small and scrawny and will have a good pair of lungs. Sarah will tell me that he reminds her of her son, the one Paul helped to save, but who then lost his leg and died of gangrene. She will say nothing of her daughters. Sarah and Mama will help take care of a new baby, as I'm afraid to look into his face and see his father there. Sonia will say that he reminds her of a child she had wanted but never had, so she will avoid his cries when she can and wait for word from Dieudonné so she can leave us, all behind. When we used to come to market before Douze, we thought that God was watching over us. Now, when we walk by the crumbled remains of the cathedral, we know there is no God left, and she's speaking of a Christian God, or else he's gone elsewhere. The cathedral is where the big weddings and government funerals took place. I would see beautiful people going in and out, and the building was so beautiful, with its rose and yellow painted walls rising into the sky and the round windows, that it made it look like a ship with portholes stranded on dry ground. I had dreamed of having my wedding there one day, when I would marry a rich man and be taken to a house in the high hills overlooking the valley of the city. At night, even then, though, it wasn't so glamorous. There were hustlers and pimps and women walking the sidewalk, but in daylight, it was a fairy tale. Now, there isn't any difference between night and day. Daylight is an illusion. I wonder why this has happened to us, not just to my family, but to all of us. This is where we live now. We are in a tent at the foot of a broken cathedral, waiting. All there is to do is wait, and wait, wait. Do's. When something terrible happens to you, it feels like a dream at first. Not until the pain and the panic settle does it seem real. This is what I will tell Didier, my brother, when he returns, and everyone will nod. I see them there gathered, Sonia, Mama, Dieudonné, Paul. They all know. Didier will nod as well. We all know. However it is we will ourselves to move through this, afterward, the terrible thing never goes away. It dims, but remains, lurking, an uninvited guest, a leech. The more you try to forget, the more it hangs on. One side is scissor to the other, back and forth, conjoined, not able to leave. The feeling uniting dream and pain lasts eternally, but you yearn for the return to a blank space, the in-between suspension between the two before they came to be jointed. You yearn for the sweet, open-eyed innocence, the comforting warmth of the blankness, to never become aware of the jointing itself, of then having to live in the after, always remembering the before. So, in conclusion, for me, Constant's mural about January 12th really invokes this idea of there being a break between the before of the earthquake and the after, a coexistence with, the rubble, the pain, the suffering, but also a thinking through and an acceptance of what has happened, not because there is any anything in the culture itself to be blamed, but in fact that the culture provides the sustenance for living with a catastrophe, moving through it, and that the gods not only are watching over us, but they weep with us and offer the possibility of rebirth, which is already there with the people, even someone as young and as innocent, but who's lost her innocence through this catastrophe, like the character of Tafia.